There are moments in life when the floor falls out from under you. Not literally, of course. But you know the feeling when something happens that is so wrong, so deeply wrong, that your whole body goes cold and your mind simply refuses to process it. I experienced that feeling on the night of my 70th birthday. And the person who caused it was my own daughter. My name is Margaret. I am 72 years old now, and I am telling you this story because I promised myself that when I finally got to the other side of it, when I could breathe again, without that tight knot living permanently in my chest, I would speak up, not for revenge, not for sympathy, but because I know, with absolute certainty, that someone watching this right now is living inside a version of my story, and they need to know that there is a way out. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. It explains everything. I was a high school English teacher for 31 years, Jefferson High School in Columbus, Ohio. I loved every single day of it, the chaos of it, the smell of chalk dust and old paperbacks. The moment you could see a student's eyes light up when a poem finally clicked. My husband, Robert, was a civil engineer. We met at Ohio State in 1974, married at 23, and built a life together that I was genuinely proud of. Not a flashy life, a real one. We bought our house on Cresthaven Drive in 1985, a 4-bedroom colonial with a big yard and a porch, where Robert and I drank our coffee every single morning for 32 years. We paid off that mortgage in 2009. The day we made the final payment, Robert opened a bottle of champagne he had been saving since our wedding. We sat on that porch and toasted to everything we had built. That house was ours. Completely, officially, legally ours. Robert passed away in the spring of 2018. A heart attack. Sudden, fast, no warning. He was 67 years old and had never spent a single night in a hospital in his life. One morning he was standing in the kitchen pouring orange juice, and by noon he was gone. I do not have words for that kind of loss. I do not think any words exist for it. I simply survived it, one day at a time, the way people do. We have 2 children. My son, Thomas, lives in Portland with his family. My daughter, Diana, lives here in Columbus, about 12 minutes from Cresthaven Drive. Diana is 44 years old. She is smart, organized, and was always the child who had a plan for everything. I used to admire that about her. She married her husband, Greg, 15 years ago. Greg works in finance investments, portfolios, that kind of thing. He is the sort of man who can make a conversation about money sound completely reasonable no matter what he is actually proposing. I would learn, much too late, exactly how dangerous that quality can be. After Robert died, I stayed in the house on Cresthaven Drive alone. I did not want to move. I did not want to change anything. That house was the last place where my life had been whole. For 2 years, I managed. I kept the porch, kept the coffee routine, kept teaching 1 adjunct class at the community college just to feel useful. Then I fell. It was December of 2020. Black ice on the driveway. I went down fast and broke my left wrist and fractured 2 ribs. I was 68 years old, lying on my own driveway at 6 in the morning, unable to get up, and it took me 40 minutes to drag myself close enough to the door to reach my phone. That was the moment I understood, in my bones, that living alone in that house was no longer the safe choice. Diana called me the same afternoon I got home from the emergency room. She said the words I suppose I needed to hear. She said, "Mom, you are not doing this alone anymore. Greg and I have talked about it, and we want you to come live with us." She said their house had a guest suite on the main floor, no stairs, its own bathroom, plenty of space. She said it would be good for their daughter, my granddaughter Lily, to have me close. She said family takes care of family. I want you to understand something. I did not jump at this. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I called Thomas and talked it through with him. I made a list of pros and cons the way Robert would have, and in the end, I said yes because I was 68. I had just broken my wrist on my own driveway, and my daughter was offering me a home. It seemed like the loving thing to accept. Here is what I did before I moved. I want to be very clear about this, because this is the part of the story that people always find confusing when they do not hear it explained properly. I did not sell my house on Cresthaven Drive. I rented it. I found a lovely tenant, a young couple, the Petersons, who signed a 2-year lease at $1,800 a month. That rental income went directly into my personal bank account. My name remained on the deed to Cresthaven Drive. My house was mine. I was not destitute. I was not desperate. I was a retired teacher with a paid-off house, a pension, Social Security, and rental income, who chose to move in with her daughter because she loved her and trusted her. I moved into Diana and Greg's house in February of 2021. For the first few months, everything was fine. Better than fine, actually. Lily was 9 years old then, and having her run into my room every morning to show me something she had drawn or a book she wanted to read together that was medicine. Pure medicine. I cooked dinner twice a week. I helped Lily with her reading. I felt useful, and I felt loved. And I thought maybe this had been the right decision after all. The first change was small enough that I almost missed it. Sometime around month 4, Greg started coming home for lunch on Fridays. That would not have been unusual, except that on those Fridays, there were often phone calls I was not quite included in, conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. I told myself I was imagining things. Retired teachers are prone to overanalyzing everything. It is an occupational hazard. The second change was harder to dismiss. Diana started managing my calendar. Appointments, prescriptions, errands. She began inserting herself into all of it. She suggested I switch my bank to the one she and Greg used, for convenience. She offered to help me manage my rental property paperwork so you don't have to stress about it. I allowed some of it. Not all of it, but some of it, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. By the fall of 2021, I noticed that the conversations between Diana and Greg went quiet, not just when I walked in, but even when I was in adjacent rooms. I noticed that Greg had started asking, very casually, very matter-of-factly, questions about Cresthaven Drive, what the property was worth now, whether I had ever thought about refinancing, whether the Petersons were good tenants, or whether I might consider a different arrangement. I answered his questions honestly, because he was my son-in-law, and I did not yet understand what he was building toward. I also noticed, and I am ashamed it took me this long, that I had stopped having my own friends over. Not because anyone told me not to, but because the house did not quite feel like mine to invite people to. My friend Carol, who I had lunch with every other Tuesday for 20 years, started texting instead of calling. My former colleague Ruth had been to the house exactly once in 10 months. I had begun to shrink. I was doing it to myself, but the environment had made shrinking feel like the appropriate choice. Then came my 70th birthday. Diana organized a dinner, 12 people, family, and a few close friends, a caterer, a cake, champagne, the whole production. I was genuinely touched by the effort. I remember sitting at the head of that table thinking, this is good. Despite everything I had been quietly worrying about, this was a good moment. Greg stood up to give a toast. He had been drinking since mid-afternoon, which I noted but said nothing about. He raised his glass and said something gracious about Robert, something about legacy, something about how proud I must be of the life I had built. And then, just as I was smiling at my granddaughter across the table, he said something that did not belong in that room at all. He said that now that I was 70, it was probably time we had a practical conversation about the future. He said that Diana and he had been carrying significant costs having me in their home, and that they had been very patient, but that going forward, they would need me to contribute $1,500 a month for my room, utilities, and what he called household maintenance. He said he was sure I would understand. He said it the way you say something inevitable, like a foregone conclusion presented at a dinner party to make it harder to refuse. The table went silent. I looked at Diana. She was looking at her plate. Lily looked at me from across the table with those big, serious eyes and said, very quietly, "Grammy?" I did not cry. I want you to know that. I felt the heat rise in my face, and I felt my heart rate spike, and I felt every single person in that room waiting to see what I would do. But I did not cry. I picked up my champagne glass. I took one slow sip, and I said, "I see. We can discuss that privately, Greg. Not tonight." He smiled like he had already won. That was December 14th. I remember the exact date because I wrote it down when I got to my room that night. I sat at my small desk and I wrote the date at the top of a page in my notebook, and underneath it I wrote 3 words: something is wrong. I had been a teacher for 31 years. I knew how to research. I knew how to follow a thread, and I had, over the course of the previous months, had a nagging feeling about the paperwork Greg had helped me organize. I had signed things. Documents that Greg had described as rental management forms and property maintenance agreements, and once, something he called a simplified power of attorney for property matters that he said was completely standard for situations like mine. I had signed that one at my kitchen table with a pen Greg handed to me, while Diana poured me a cup of tea. I had not read it carefully. I am not telling you that to excuse myself. I am telling you because it is true. And because it matters that I say it plainly. I did not read it carefully. And that almost cost me everything. The Monday after my birthday dinner, I called my son Thomas and told him what had happened. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me a question that stopped my blood cold. He said, "Mom, do you know exactly what documents you've signed in the last year?" I said I thought I knew. He said, "I think you need to find out for certain." I called a real estate attorney. Her name was Patricia Webb, and she came recommended by Carol, my Tuesday lunch friend who had apparently been worried about me for longer than she had let on. Patricia was efficient, direct, and within 48 hours of receiving the documents I had copies of, she called me and asked me to come into her office. What she showed me changed the shape of everything. The document Greg had called a simplified power of attorney for property matters was not simplified, and it was not limited to property matters. It had given Greg legal authority to conduct real estate transactions on my behalf, including the ability to add names to titles and encumber properties with financial instruments. Using that document, Greg had, 8 months prior, taken out a home equity line of credit against my house on Cresthaven Drive. $72,000. The money had gone directly into a joint account held by Diana and Greg. Patricia laid the documents out on the table between us, one by one, and explained each one with the kind of measured patience that people use when they have had to deliver terrible news before. My name was still on the deed. That was the one thing they had not changed outright, because changing the deed itself would have been more difficult and would have required a notarized transaction that I would have had to appear for in person. But the equity, the financial value I had spent decades building in that house, had been quietly emptied while I was living 12 minutes away, teaching my granddaughter to read. I sat in Patricia's office for a long time after she finished talking. I looked at the papers. I thought about Greg's toast at my birthday dinner. I thought about Diana looking at her plate. I thought about Robert and our bottle of champagne. Patricia gave me time. Then she said, "Margaret, I want to be clear with you about something. What was done here was not a gray area. This was financial elder abuse, and you have every legal right to pursue this. I will tell you what I did not do. I did not call Diana. I did not confront Greg. I did not walk into their living room and throw those papers on the coffee table the way part of me desperately wanted to. I had been a teacher long enough to know that the person who shows their hand too early loses the game. I took Patricia's advice. I organized my documents. I kept living in that house as though nothing had changed. I kept cooking dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I kept helping Lily with her homework, and every single day, I added one more page to a notebook that I kept locked in my suitcase. Patricia filed a civil suit on my behalf in March. The allegation was financial elder abuse, fraudulent use of power of attorney, and misappropriation of property equity. Greg hired an attorney within a week, an expensive one, which I found particularly interesting given that 6 months earlier he had described himself to various relatives as financially stretched. Diana called me from a separate phone the evening she received service. She was crying. She said she had not known about the equity line. She said Greg had handled everything. She said she was sorry, that she was so sorry, that she had let this happen. I said, Diana, I need you to tell that to a judge. The case took 4 months to resolve. I will not bore you with every detail of the legal process because Patricia handled it brilliantly, and I mostly tried to stay calm and keep watering my plants. What I can tell you is that Greg's attorney attempted 3 separate arguments, each of which Patricia dismantled with documentation. What I can tell you is that the court found in my favor on every count. What I can tell you is that the full $72,000 was ordered repaid to me, plus legal fees, plus damages. And what I can tell you is that Greg's real estate license, which I had not even known he held, was suspended pending a separate investigation by the state licensing board. I moved back to Cresthaven Drive in July. The Petersons had ended their lease in May and moved to Denver, so the house was empty when I came back to it. I stood in the front hallway with my suitcase, and I looked at the staircase and the living room and the kitchen, where Robert had poured orange juice on the last morning of his life, and I sat down on the bottom step and I cried for about 20 minutes. Not from sadness, from relief. From the specific, overwhelming relief of being in your own home, on your own floor, under your own roof. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because it is the part that surprised me most. Diana called me in September. Not through a lawyer, just her phone, to my phone, on a Tuesday afternoon. She said she had been in therapy since March. She said she had spent months understanding how she had allowed Greg to take over her judgment, how she had chosen his plans over her conscience, how she had looked at her plate at my birthday dinner when she should have stood up and said no. She said she understood if I never wanted to see her again. She said she would accept whatever I decided. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. I thought about the woman who organized my 70th birthday party with caterers and champagne, who had also failed me in a way I still do not fully understand. I thought about Lily, who had texted me 7 times since I moved out, asking when Grammy was coming to read with her again. I said, Diana, I need time, and I need you to keep going to therapy. And I need to never, in my life, have another conversation, like the one we are going to have, about what happened. She said, I know, we are not where we were. I want to be honest about that. There is a distance between us now that did not exist before, and I do not know if it will ever fully close. What I do know is that Lily comes to Cresthaven Drive every other Saturday, and we sit on the porch and drink lemonade, and she reads to me. Now she is 11, and she reads beautifully, and those mornings are the best mornings of my week. I spoke to a counselor at the Columbus Elder Justice Center after my case was resolved. She told me something I have thought about almost every day since. She said that financial elder abuse within families almost never starts as a plan. It starts as an opportunity, a gradual accumulation of trust and access and paperwork. Until one day, the person being trusted realizes that the trust was being treated as a resource, not a gift. She said the most dangerous sentence in elder financial abuse is not sign this. It is we'll handle it for you. Because that sentence sounds like love. And sometimes it is love. But sometimes it is the beginning of something else entirely. I want to say one thing directly to anyone watching this who is in the position I was in. Maybe you are living with family right now. Maybe someone is helping you manage your finances or your property, and it feels easier to let them. Maybe you have signed documents you did not read as carefully as you should have, because the person handing them to you was someone you raised, or someone you have known for decades. I am not here to frighten you. I am here to tell you that you have the right to understand every single document that has your name on it. You have the right to your own attorney, not one recommended by the family member helping you. You have the right to call your county's adult protective services if something feels wrong, and you have the right to fight back, even when the fight is with people you love. I am 72 years old. I live in the house Robert and I bought in 1985. My coffee is still on the porch every morning, and I still have Robert's champagne glass in the cabinet, the good one, the crystal one from our wedding, because some things you hold on to. My name is on my deed. It is the only place it needs to be.